Good evening, everybody. It is nice to see you all in person, back here at the Wheaton Library and Rec Center, where we met for the first time in person back on July 11th, about 4.5 months ago, for the very first meeting of the Montgomery County Anti-Hate Task Force. And what a 4.5 months it's been. I first want to extend my deep appreciation and the appreciation of all my colleagues and everybody in county government for the members of this task force, for dedicating your time since this summer to meeting and talking and strategizing with each other and with members of the community about how we keep our community whole and keep our community safe. Because ultimately that's what the purpose of this task force has been, recognizing that here in Montgomery County, we have had an unprecedented number of crimes against individuals because of the color of their skin, where they pray, who they love, what their immigration status is. And it's been a 10-year high. And that was just as earlier this year. And that's why when we convened this group, it was convened in a way so that the communities that have been most affected are the ones who are strategizing and coming up with solutions for their own community. That's why we had the African American Black cohort, the AAPI, the Jewish, the Latino Hispanic, the LGBTQ+, and the Muslim cohorts. And the groups and the people within it truly do represent the diversity within our broader community. We recognize that the 6 groups are not monoliths amongst themselves. And the conversations that have taken place have been really thoughtful and heartfelt conversations even within these groups about how to best represent your own community, but represent the community and keep us all healthy and safe. And those meetings over the last 4.5 months have numbered nearly 50 public meetings that you all have led and participated in. And so again, I extend my deep, heartfelt appreciation for the time you all have dedicated to our community. I also want to extend our appreciation to a number of individuals who have helped facilitate this process over the last 4.5 months. First and foremost, from the council, I want to recognize Bertha and Selena, who have been our point people. I saw some, yes, please give them a round of applause. Just like everybody else who has volunteered to serve on this task force, they too have other day jobs at the council. And I know that they have put themselves into this effort and have found it incredibly rewarding to help our community in this regard. I also want to extend our appreciation to the communication team who have been able to live stream and record and fill up this room so that everybody can participate. And I know that there are dozens of people online. So thank you to our entire comms team for putting this on. And then last but not least, I just want to take a moment of personal privilege to extend my appreciation to my entire personal office, Valeria and David and everybody else who is here, because not only have we been operating on all cylinders as the office of the council president this year, but we've been working to make sure that this task force has all the support that it needs. So my deep appreciation to Valeria and the entire team as well. You'll hear more about that next week, but that's just a preview. And so just framing tonight's conversation for those who are here and those who are following. There are a number of our colleagues. I'm going to invite up the county executive to speak next, followed by Councilmember Jawando and any of my other colleagues who might be joining us. But then what we're going to do is we're going to hear from each of the cohorts themselves in a brief presentation about the work that you've been doing and the recommendations that you have. And then after we hear from all 6 groups, we will codify the recommendations and vote on them in mass to signify the completion of the formal work group that is this task force. And then next week, 1 week from today, the task force will come before the full council and provide recommendations as reported out to the entire council, and we'll have another public conversation. But make no mistake about it, this is not the end of this work. We know the work continues, we know the feelings that are in our community, and we know how tough it is. It was not only tough on July 11th, but it got tougher after October 7th. And I know that we're going to have those conversations tonight, and we'll continue having those conversations in our community. But I just wanted to thank you all again for dedicating the last 4.5, almost 5 months to this effort, expressing your love and compassion for this community we all share, one of the most diverse communities in the entire country. It's why we all live here. It's why we're dedicated to it. And my heartfelt appreciation to all of you. So now I'd like to invite County Executive Elrich up. So thank you all for being here this evening.
So, hello everybody. Good evening. And I too want to thank you for the work you've done over the past months. And it certainly got harder as we got into the fall. And I know how hard this is for a lot of people. It's personal for an awful lot of people. And it's real for everybody. I don't think anybody is untouched by what is going on in the world. And I don't think any of us are naive to think that it's not having, effects back here. And I'm concerned about that, but there's a lot of work we need to do, and there's a lot of work we can do. And the fact that you've been able to stand together and work together through all this time is a hopeful sign that we can continue to have the kind of discussions that, I think for a long time has set Montgomery County apart from other communities. Sometimes I think lately, it's hard to appreciate, the sense of diversity and the sense of inclusiveness in the county. But I've taken just got back from a trip to India and Vietnam. And one of the things that was impressive was we brought with us both Asian and Indian business people. And when they talked to the populations, the Indian population, the Vietnamese population, and they were talking about being business people in Montgomery County. They talked about what it was like to be in an inclusive county where everybody gets treated the way they should be treated and where they feel welcome, and encouraging the people they were talking to come to Montgomery County because it was the best place that they could imagine, best place to come to that they could imagine. And I think about that because I'm well aware of the tensions in the community and the strife in the community. And I think we need to remember that we've accomplished a lot, and that a lot of people look to us and see us as kind of a beacon of reasonableness and of how you find ways to work together with people, how you transition from a county that in 1970 was 95% white, 4.5% black, and 0.5% everybody else. And today we're 21% Hispanic, 19% black, 16% Asian. And that's, or you can put it another way, 44% white and 56% everybody else. And that's a remarkable change, and a lot of communities can't make that kind of change the way the changes occurred here. And I'm really proud of this county and the way we've been able to handle ourselves. And I hope that what comes out of this task force is, a path forward where we can continue to have discussions and continue to work with each other and to not be dragged into the other world on the other side of the ocean. Those battles do not need to come here. And we need all together to find a peaceful resolution to what is happening in the world. I am, that one of the saddest things that I think about is this idea that you're in the middle of what do you call it, ceasefire. And then when the ceasefire is over, you're just going to go back to killing each other again. It's kind of numbing. It's kind of like, why doesn't it just continue? Why don't we just figure out a way to solve the problem, which I don't believe you're going to solve by seeing how many people you can kill. I just don't believe that's the solution to a problem. And, it's troubling to think that in some parts of the world this has come down to that. And it's not healthy. And it's one of the things I hope we can avoid here. And so, I really appreciate what everybody's trying to do. I think it's important to be able to listen to each other. I think it's important to try to find the common ground that we all have. I've stood, for years in this county where we stood on stages with people from every religion in this county. And people held hands and talked together and said, hate has no home here. Everybody is welcome here. We're all going to work together here. And I think we've got to remember that we did that. We've done that. And that's a lot of what our fabric is. And despite what we're experiencing right now, it's important, I think, to protect that fabric and to find a way so that becomes the way we feel about everyday life in Montgomery County. And I know it's not easy. And I know a lot of people are hurting. And I feel it for everybody who's hurting here. But I also feel that at the end of the day, we don't want to descend into the kind of darkness that is in other places. It's not good to go to your dark place. It's not good for any of us to go to a dark place. And I think it's incumbent on us to find a way forward in how we work together. And my hope is that the work you do today will lead to policies that we can help use to strengthen Montgomery County, and that we'll find ways to continue to work with each other, that people who were friends and were shaking hands 6 months ago will still be able to be friends and shake hands 6 months from now. So that's my hope for what comes out of this. And I hope we have the patience and forbearance to get ourselves through this, because it's really important for everybody. It's important for our kids, and it's important for us. And we need to be the best examples, and we need to be the best angels. And we do not need the worst of the angels and the worst of our instincts to be the way we're measured. We need to be measured by the best of our instincts and the best of our intentions. So again, thank you. And I'm going to stay around for a while. I have another meeting I have to go to. But I wanted to come here tonight because I know the work you did is important, and it took a lot for you to stay at this. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for your service on this commission. I know this has been task force. Let me give it the right name. There's a difference. I know this has been difficult. I know that it's harrowing. I know that it's heavy. I know that it has a lot of emotions and feelings with it. I've been able to participate in several of the breakout subgroups. My staff, Marisa, who I want to thank, has participated in all of the sessions, full in many of the subgroups. I've watched a lot of the sessions that you've had, all the main meetings. And obviously, we are dealing with a difficult set of situations right now across the world. We were just talking about it's not just the conflict that's happening in the Middle East right now. There are conflicts all over the globe. And in a county where a third of our residents are foreign-born, and their children live here, and we have an international community, we're all feeling it in different ways. And then, oh, by the way, we still have the good old-fashioned American forms of discrimination and racism that have always been here, and how we deal with that. And so it's heavy, and it can seem dark. But, one of my favorite quotes from Desmond Tutu is, "Hope is the ability to see that there is light in the midst of darkness." This room is hope for me. And this task force has been hope. I want to thank President Glass and his team for putting this together. and having the foresight to put this together. Everyone on the council is committed to taking the recommendations from each of your subgroups and acting on them. This is not a rote exercise for any of us. As chair of the Education and Culture Committee, I know many of your recommendations relate to MCPS. And we have MCPS here tonight. I know they participated. I know they agree. The superintendent, the board, and our committee will take up these recommendations in a serious way and work with the board and the system to make sure we move forward. That's one example of how we're going to move forward. We passed an appropriation today, or introduced an appropriation today, to add more money to our nonprofit security grant program, something that we care about deeply in this county. We don't have all the answers. And this commission, this task force won't have all the answers, but we're going to try. We're going to keep hoping. We're going to keep doing better. And being in dialogue with one another is step one. And it's step two. And we're going to keep doing it. And so I wanted to come and participate today just to say thank you and to acknowledge the heaviness of this work and your dedication to it, and say that we take it very, very seriously. The whole county, all of us. I love this county. I love this state. Thank God we live in a place that even does something like this. There's so many communities where you get in a room like this and there's just yelling and argument. And we can have serious conversations because we say, and everyone in this room, in this county, the majority of people in this county believe that hate has no home here. And that gives me hope for how we move forward. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to bring up now our very important partner in this work, our chief, Marcus Jones.
Good evening. First and foremost, I want to say to Council President Glass, thank you for the invitation this evening, to County Executive Mr. Elrich again for the support. And I want to again thank all of you for the very fine work that I have witnessed over the last few months in a very short period of time, as noted earlier. And you know, what's very interesting here, in the world that we live in, it's amazing that there is still a great deal of misunderstanding all throughout our communities. And one of the things I think clearly this task force has been has shown that they are willing to put energy behind the work, because that's what it takes in order to help all of us. And when I say all of us, I think we all have to be open-minded and understanding each other. And I think when people really understand, and it's one thing we talk about often in many facets of in my business and the profession, but I think in our communities, as I talk to many people in the community, them understanding others' plights, these understanding others' journeys, and again, sometimes we get so caught up in our own world, we fail to look at what others have gone through and in their struggles. So the one thing I do want to stress to all of you from the Montgomery County Police Department, though we are not perfect, the one thing I do know that we are committed to making sure that this light is shining on any misbehavior of individuals in our community. We will not be the ones who will be the judge of those who feel that they have been discriminated against, harassed, or some hate has been spewed upon them. That is not our call. My officers know that. So when someone makes the call, and we are encouraging our community to make sure that they let us know that these events are occurring. We feel like we can't plan as a community to address these problems if we don't know about these problems. And the one thing about Montgomery County, that I can state in the state of Maryland is that when you look at the statistics across the state for each county that represents in the way that the state now mandates, but that Montgomery County has already led the way, our police department in basically documenting hate crimes and hate bias incidents. And that's something that we will not stop doing. We will continue to lead the way in that. And that I've had several conversations with other police leaders in the state asking a simple question of how and why do we do it this way? And we do it because we say our community demands this of us. And this is something we feel very, it's important work for us to do this in order to be able to try to figure out a way to eradicate hate in our community and identify hate and particularly any dangers in our community, which is vitally important to helping to understand not only what's happening in our community, but how to keep our community safe. So again, I want to say to you all that we're very interested in the recommendations. We would also ask that if anyone has questions on how we actually go about doing some of our work, some of our reporting, some of our training, how we address this internally with our own officers, we ask to have those conversations with myself or my staff so that we can again work together in order to eradicate the hate that could be occurring in our community, and we want to make sure we're eradicated so it no longer exists in this community. So thank you also very much for allowing me to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Jones and County Executive Elrich and Councilmember Jawando, who I think has already left. What we're going to do now is have each of the different groups report out their recommendations. And if we can try to keep it to 5 minutes, and we're going to do it in alphabetical order. So I'll just share this now, but then remember the order. The African American Black group will go first, then the AAPI, then the Jewish group, then the Latino Hispanic group, the LGBTQ plus group, and then the Muslim group in alphabetical order. And you all have designated your own leads, and so we defer to you for the report out, but if you could keep it to 5 minutes, that would be helpful. And we'll start with the first group, the African American Black group.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ron Wright, and as you can tell, I'm a member of the African American and Black cohort. You can't miss that. I do want to start off by saying if I seem a little lethargic, I'm just getting over COVID, so you probably need to sanitize this mic when I get done. And we should note also, this is 3 weeks after getting a booster, so I don't know, maybe they're putting water in the booster, I don't know. But first of all, I want to start off by thanking our council president, Evan Glass, for having the courage to convene this body. As an African American, we struggle daily with the issues that we've been dealing with over the last few months. And in many cases, coming together, we've discovered that there appears to be no end. Before I get into our report, I want to also thank our county executive, Mark Elrich, and our chief of police, Marcus Jones. How's your golf game, Chief? And I'll try to keep it in within 5 minutes. I will let you know also that during our numerous calls, people continue to refer to me as Reverend. And so I could be here a couple more hours, hopefully not. But let me begin with the mission. Our county president Council President tasked us with to examine the county's growing incidence of hate crimes, bias, and hate incidents in our communities, and to formulate solutions and recommendations to combat them and report back to you with our findings. Our work began on July 11th, 2023, some 142 days ago. We began this critical mission to find these solutions. Unfortunately, as our cohort sees it, it is still gripping our community with increased frequency and ferocity, and again, without pause. We continue to understand that we are in a state of emergency, of feeling the wrath of hate, and we believe immediate action is required by our county to combat it without further delay. Let me stop here by also recognizing some of our cohort members. We were honored to serve with Director Jim Stowe, who is to my left, Attorney Lisa Taylor, who's also to my left, Jackie Denard, also there, and we are missing 2 other cohort members. In this process, they all brought to the table their respective experiences, not only from their backgrounds, but from their experiences with hate. We also want to applaud the stakeholders and community members who, along with us, did the necessary due diligence. And based on the information and the data they assembled in our community surveys and listening sessions with MCPS, we were able to come up with some, we think, very viable and effective recommendations. So these came after also, as you can tell, numerous virtual meetings, countless hours of work, and with the tenacity and courage to also let you know how this has been affecting us as a community. Our examination then caused us some tribulation, trauma, and however, some triumph as we were drawn closer to discovering the keys to eradicating hate in Montgomery County. Despite our stark differences in history and the unspeakable acts of terrorism, brutality, civil deprivations, and ongoing rejection by America since 1619, we're still here, living and thriving in Montgomery County without any cause to hate. Our examination took us to primarily 3 places: the faith and community places, our MCPS, public schools, and our criminal justice system. We cannot come to these recommendations without some findings. And so I will give you some of the major ones that we encountered. 1, Black churches have been continually vandalized and defaced with anti-Black messaging and other open acts of hate. We also found that based on the 2022 State Bias Report, Black and African Americans have the highest number of anti-hate incidences committed against them at a rate of 34.2%. We also found in Montgomery County, African Americans make up a large majority of anti-Black hate incidents, and they are at 3 times higher than the other groups, some 43.4%. And the county local stats also show that from January through September of this year, 82 incidents have occurred against the Black community within also MCPS at a percentage of 61% and averaging 9 incidents per month. Furthermore, the cohort found that in MCPS, students' complaints are underreported because students believe MCPS is unresponsive to their complaints. Moreover, 80% of African American and Latino Hispanic students are the subject of expulsions, and African Americans are also overrepresented in suspensions. With only 21% enrolled, African Americans make up 48% of the suspensions from MCPS. Additionally, there is some evidence that the achievement gap between Black and African American students and white students is widening and remains significantly lower than their counterparts. We also found that long-serving teachers and students within our MCPS are continuing to make students uncomfortable by making racial comments and committing other microaggressions against them. Our presentation we made on October the 26th gave you the full body of our research, examination, and our recommendations. And they can be reviewed and viewed again on YouTube. So I will give you a summary of and we were pretty prolific, 24 recommendations, but I'm going to give you 2 from each category, including our community church, MCPS, and our criminal justice system. So as you can see, recommendations, primarily improvements are needed. And in our Montgomery County criminal justice system, we're recommending that the county council should augment the Committee Against Hate and Violence by adding representation from the state's attorney's office and courts to, first, clearly identify and define the roots and motivations behind hate and hate incidents being committed in Montgomery County. 2, to dismantle and eliminate established hate groups and organizations. And 3, work in concert to identify mechanisms to prevent radicalization of perpetrators and to de-radicalize known perpetrators of hate and hate crimes. We're also recommending that the justice system enforce the mandatory reporting requirements of hate and bias incidents by police, and that our MCPD partners hold police accountable for failing to comply with the hate and bias reporting requirement. In the area of Montgomery County Public Schools, our cohort is recommending that MCPS would create a parent advisory committee with term limits who meet directly with Superintendent McKnight in her kitchen cabinet to review hate and bias incidents and propose recommendations. 2, enforce the mandatory reporting requirement of hate bias incidents in schools, and also hold administrators accountable for failing to comply with the reporting requirements. And lastly, our recommendations with respect to our faith-based and community spaces, we recommend that Montgomery County Council begin to hold periodic listening sessions with the Black and African American community throughout the county. That the county council also work with the newly created Civil Rights Office of Maryland, of the Maryland State's Attorney's General Office, to assist with the development of civil rights policies for the state. As I mentioned earlier, we were quite prolific, and we have 24 recommendations that will be published sometime later. I do note that we have a meeting coming up sometime in December where we will formally present these recommendations. But I would like to end with, first of all, thanking all the other cohorts for your hard work and for allowing us to participate and share with you. I do apologize as chair of this committee for not having the time to attend all of your meetings, but I do know, and I've heard from credible sources, that you did incredible work. You put your heart and soul in this, and you were truly committed to our mission of eradicating hate in Montgomery County. So I would just leave with this conclusion that we can't continue to turn the page on hate. We have to act now to stop it. We can't continue to permit it, to foster it, nor condone it. We can't continue to allow the violence of hate crimes, bias, and hate incidents to continue to plague our communities, but more importantly, to rob our youth of their joy that they should be enjoying in their youthful years. Please think about it. Please also practice your own personal behavior or monitor your own personal behavior so that you will not be the contributor of hate, but the sponsor of love and camaraderie in our communities. Thank you for your time.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ariani Ong from the API cohort. I'd like to introduce our cohort members. The next slide. Juan Dang, Nazneen Safi, Jeff Laves here, and also May Powers. Before I get started, I want to highlight a couple of key factors related to the API community. Next slide. APIs is not a homogeneous community as represented by our cohort members. We're Chinese, Indonesian, Vietnamese, Cambodian, South Asian. But we're actually a political construct of different ethnic groups. Here in the county, it's about 20 plus. And most importantly, we have the highest income inequality gap, which means that if you average our income and our educational attainment, that just feeds into the model minority myth that we don't have challenges and needs. That's a very important point I want all of you to remember. Next slide. And because Anapis, I'm going to call Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders Anapis for short, are majority immigrants, that 71% of adults are foreign born. They face multiple barriers to effectively dealing with hate crimes, including recognizing hate crimes, reporting, and seeking assistance. They are the group that is least likely to report. Next slide. Anti-Asian hate is often tied to foreign events, economic competition, and another challenge is that it's just not well recognized when they occur. Next slide. Our cohort is making 5 recommendations across 3 areas to address anti-Asian hate. And as a preface, these recommendations come from our working knowledge that strong community is the antidote to addressing hate. Strong community. So we seek to educate, engage, and empower the Napi community. Next slide. Oh, sorry. We need to back up to recommendation number 1. Here we go. Relates to schools and youth. And so this recommendation is to monitor, advise, and fund MCPS to fully implement its new anti-racism action plan. So I want to applaud MCPS for the work. Several of us had input on that. Implementation includes understanding Anapis fully by breaking down data to ethnic groups and also providing cultural proficiency trainings, meeting the mental health needs by providing culturally proficient and linguistically accessible services, involving Anapis in inclusion efforts, and ensuring accountability by having the County Council's Education and Culture Committee to oversee the implementation of the MCPS Anti-Racism Action Plan so that responses are fair, equitable, and consistent across schools. and having MCPS sponsor an annual public meeting in order to share out the progress on DEI efforts, or the plan. Recommendation 2 relates to, actually recommendations 2 to 4 relates to the Anapi community. The first is carrying out a public relations campaign. The implementation includes using PSAs, public service announcements, for community education around hate crimes. A number of our members cannot recognize bias incidents or hate crimes. And then separately, to foster a strong sense of community pride as we feel that we are still invisible. PSAs would be posted at public and private sites and including workplaces. The PSAs would be translated and list a reporting hotline that would be staffed by people who are trained in culturally proficient services related to mental health, crisis management, social services, or case management, who are multilingual and also, importantly, locally neighborhood-based. Also ensuring that the messages reach the target community by using ethnic media and ethnic social media platforms, since many members rely on that exclusively instead of mainstream news. Engaging the success of this campaign by resident polls. Recommendation 3 is to apply racial equity lens to county decision-making involving Anapis. These implementation actions would include having an improved understanding of Anapis based on collecting disaggregated data, again, that's ethnic group data, and holding cultural proficiency trainings on Anapis across the government. Being intentional about Anapi perspectives, which means inviting community leaders who are connected and have knowledge of the community, specifically the different ethnic groups, collecting narratives on the different ways that Anapis experience bias, and applying a racial equity lens to evaluate access and use of county programs and services, and convening a State of Anapis Summit to measure the county's progress toward DEI goals. Lastly, cultivating Anapi leaders with community connections to top decision-making positions across the county. Recommendation 4 is to expand capacity building of Anapi community serving organizations. This means standing up Anapi civic and advocacy organizations, not just direct service providers, but those who can actually lift up the needs to county leaders, articulating them, and partnering on the anti-hate efforts, and also supporting solidarity work. Funding navigators to assist survivors of hate across systems, such as victims' funds, compensation, insurance, legal representation, and to serve as a support companion, as a translator, as a media spokesperson beside that victim of hate, and also to provide training for those navigators. And growing a community coalition of pan-Anapi organizations similar to the county's leadership on creating the Montgomery County Coalition for Adult English Literacy. Recommendation 5. Actions here include creating a hate crime response plan that's ready so that we're prepared for the worst case scenario. And what I mean by that is those that include mass shootings. And I've responded to those in San Francisco, LA, Chicago, I can't even tell you, and it's the worst thing when you're not prepared. Conducting practice simulations, that's by community and across the county as well, multiracial, multi-faith coordination, improving cross-cultural trainings, and providing funding for bystander intervention trainings. So in conclusion, I want to thank you, especially County Council President Evan Glass, County Executive Mark Elrich, Police Chief Marcus Jones, Selena Singleton, Bertha, and all the cohort communities. We've learned a lot from you. And we thank you for your support of the NAPI community. We believe these recommendations will help our community members be self-informed, self-empowered to address hate, to help our organizations be partners to the county government on equity and racial justice, and also help our organizations close this short history gap that we have, and to have that capacity to be strong solidarity allies. Thank you very much.
Ooh, I think I just ate some of the disinfectant. Great. So I am Meredith Weisel. I am obviously part of the Jewish cohort. Only two of us are here tonight. Alan Ronkin is also here as well, and you can see everybody else who is on the list: Alex Stone, Ron Helber, and Rabbi Sue Shankman. Before we start, what I want to just kind of acknowledge is, the past few years have been really, really difficult for a lot of people in a lot of different marginalized communities. The rise in hate and extremism coming in every different direction has had a real impact, and it is such a blessing to live and be a resident in Montgomery County in such an incredibly diverse and welcoming and inclusive community. But that doesn't mean we don't have problems, obviously. And I really just want to thank Councilmember Evan Glass and all of the council members really and the county executive for bringing this together and allowing us to learn from each other and listen. And so with that, what I want to just sort of highlight, because we only have a couple of slides because we really just wanted to get to the top level recommendations, but what I want to just mention is, so similar to what Ariane just talked about, the Jewish community is not a monolith either. We are very diverse in religious practices, in race, in gender identity. It is very, very diverse within the Jewish community across the world. And worldwide, the Jewish population is only 0.2%. So somewhere between 14 and 15 million, depending on who you ask and what statistics. And half of that, so 2.4% of the US population is Jewish. So about 7 to 8 million, 7.6 million is some of the recent statistics. So we're actually a very small amount of the community, and so I do want to just acknowledge that and just sort of put that out there at the beginning. And when you look at hate crime statistics, particularly religion-based hate crimes, the Jewish community makes up the majority of it. It's more than 50%. So very small population, but very high amount of hate crimes. And that is, I'm saying hate crimes from the FBI. The hate and bias incidents, the numbers are even higher. And we are very grateful, thank you, Chief, for being here, that Montgomery County does track hate and bias incidents, because it's important to remember intent when we're thinking about hate and bias incidents, but also the impact it has on all different communities when a hate bias incident happens. So with that, next slide, please. So just real quick, one of the first things when we did our presentation was give an overall definition of anti-Semitism. This is a widely used definition by a lot of different organizations. The United States government has this, the county government, the state governments. It is the way that when we're talking about anti-Semitism, and you can see it is a form of prejudice directed towards Jews as individuals or as a group. A lot of anti-Semitism stems from stereotypes and conspiracy theories. It can target Jews based on your religious practice. It could target you based on other beliefs. There is, as I said, historical and contemporary tropes that look at Jews as untrustworthy, disloyal, polluted, greedy. These are just some of the examples. There are definitely a lot more. And because the worldwide Jewish population, half of the population does live in Israel, it is important. So as Ariane also noted, there are a lot of things that impact the Jewish community on a foreign basis. And so the delegitimization, the not acknowledging the existence of the state of Israel, the demonization or applying a double standard to Israel, particularly the Israeli government. And so with that, you can see the overall definition. So next slide, please. So one of the things that when the cohort met, that you can just, actually if you want to just tab, it'll pull them all up. So one of the things that we had talked about, and I'm going to just stand a little bit here so I can see, was specifically about increasing community awareness and an understanding of anti-Semitism and the threat it has to the United States, and specifically, obviously, here in Montgomery County. A way to strengthen education of the Jewish community. So as I said, the Jewish community is not a monolith, and understanding the diversity within the Jewish community, looking at understanding the Holocaust as a chapter in the book on anti-Semitism, meaning that it is one of the most egregious chapters, but that is not the only way that we have seen anti-Semitism. We have seen it for millennia, long before the Holocaust, and we are still continuing to see it today. Specifically talking about, and I think a few of us have already mentioned this in the cohorts, hate and bullying and how we're seeing it manifesting in our schools. Also, when we're talking about DEI practices within the workplace, making sure that anti-Semitism is part of those conversations. Things like recognizing Jewish American Heritage Month, which we're very grateful for this year, was by the county council, because it's important, and I think that's important for a lot of the cohorts here within their communities, recognizing those various months. Anti-bias workshops, holding trainees for county employees in all departments as well, because we are asking the county council and the county executive to think about how this impacts their employees and not just the private community, so a public-private partnership. And anti-Semitism and religious bigotry and anti-discrimination policies. Next slide, please. So you can just tap each one as you go through it. Perfect. So one of the things, and then the last slide when we get to the next slide is going to be the full recommendations, but one of the things we also wanted to talk about is when you're thinking about anti-Semitism, and this does apply to other forms of hate and discrimination, there are things that we as individuals, and that's why it is so incredible how diverse we are here, we can be doing in a public-private partnership with the county government. When you see something anti-Semitic, we are asking you to call it out. And what we mean by that is that, you know, when you hear somebody who maybe says a microaggression, or as I said, a stereotype sometimes, understanding that how that impacts the rest of the community. So we want people to learn about it and then how to call it out. We also want to make sure that we are coalition building, and that is one of the reasons why we're all here, making sure that we all do have a seat at the table to have these really hard discussions as well. Legislating about education, things like the Holocaust and other genocides throughout our history. It's really important to not meet hate with hate, even when there are difficult conversations. That doesn't help any of us move forward. Building relationships, being an ally, an upstander, not a bystander when we're working through this, and building community collective action to counter hate. And I think that beyond this task force, that's what we need to be thinking, is on a more regular basis. Even though the task force will have finished, how do we continue these conversations? Understanding about improving safety and security for Jewish and other marginalized communities, things like the nonprofit security grants for faith-based institutions, but also nonprofits who maybe are not faith-based, but are part of marginalized communities. And then also one of the things that we have highlighted specifically was looking at local legislation to white supremacist propaganda, because this has been impacting communities across the country, particularly here. And white supremacist propaganda is like an endemic in the community nationwide, and there are local laws that are starting to be implemented, taking into account things like free speech, but how that also impacts, because that does increase hate. And then the last slide, please. You can just tap through it. Perfect. So we broke this down into county executive and county council recommendations. So as I said, trainings for all county employees, and specifically holding anti-bias workshops and specific trainings for county employees on anti-Semitism, including anti-Semitism in the religious bigotry and anti-discrimination policies, looking at local legislation to combat hateful propaganda and flyers, recognizing Jewish American Heritage Month, creating a strategic and comprehensive community organizational partnership, something that meets twice a year. So we are recommending this task force in some form or another continues, and that is something, and it could be more than twice a year, but we also want to look at something, not just, we did specifically say holding a month against hate each year, but if we can meet twice a year and then have a big meeting to talk about where we are, because this is, as much as I think we'd all love to eradicate hate, we know some of it is in some way or another is going to continue. And so how do we specifically counter that? We talked about enhancing security funding, and then specifically for law enforcement, require trainings on hate crimes and extremism for all law enforcement officers and staff. Because not everybody within the Montgomery County Police Department is somebody who is out on the beat. Sometimes they are people answering the phones, and it could be the non-emergency line. And so proper training for them to recognize what is happening. We do think there should be a hate crime special liaison branch within MCPD, and potentially a specific hotline for bias and hate incidents. The Attorney General does have one specific right now, but really something within our county. And then for MCPS, we feel very strongly there needs to be legislating education about the Holocaust and other forms of genocide. Many other states and counties have started to do this. And then training specifically for MCPS faculty and teachers. We're not just talking about people who are in the classrooms, but across the entire MCPS organization, specifically on the history of anti-Semitism. And again, I'm not just talking about on the Holocaust, but before the Holocaust, during the Holocaust, what happened after, and then through today. And I think that is everything. So we really just want to thank everybody, for being a part of this. It is really important that we continue to sort of break down these barriers, even though we may have disagreements about some of the things that are happening. It is so important that we continue to open these discussions. Thank you.
All right. Buenas noches. Good evening, everyone. My name is Alex Vasquez. I am the co-chair of the Latino Hispanic cohort. And before I begin, I just want to really just recognize all the members of the cohort. Next slide, please. Danielle and Nora, who are here with us this evening, right? But also, Ruben and Nora, who are here with us this evening, but also Danielle and Vanessa, who played a pivotal role in ensuring that we got the recommendations put together. I know that we are here mostly in our personal capacity, but we also work with organizations that collectively service hundreds, if not thousands, of Montgomery County residents, particularly in the Hispanic and Latino community. And so it is definitely an honor and a privilege to be here with all of you tonight. So before we begin, I just wanted to uplift a little bit about just the terminology, like so many of you, right? The Latinx community, which is the terminology that we decided to use as a cohort, is a community, that is from all over the place, right? From all over Latin America, but is mosaic. And then there's diversity from what people from Latin America choose to identify themselves as. So common phrases: Hispanic, Latinx, Latin, Latino, and Latina. And we just wanted to uplift that as well. And so for the purposes, right, we decided that Latinx was the most appropriate for us, but we know that there's others in our community that use other terminology. So next slide, please. So before I dive into the recommendations, I think it's important to uplift, right, just how our community not only got to the United States, but particularly in this area. And a lot of it stems from just a lot of historical events that occurred in the 1980s and 1990s that really brought a lot of diversity and a lot of different countries from Latin America, here specifically in Montgomery County, but in the DMV. And so up there you can see just a little bit of the history of some of those historical events that brought a lot of migration to this area. Next slide. So we wanted to uplift this as well, because as most of us know, unfortunately, a lot of of these incidences are coming from our schools, Montgomery County Public Schools, and it's kind of hard to see, but we wanted to just uplift this, that while the Latinx population in the county is only 20.3%, the population in Montgomery County Public Schools is higher at 34.6%, and in particularly in kindergarten, 36% of all kindergartens in the 2022 and 2023 school year were Latinx. And so just to uplift, right, that Latinx is the fastest growing population in the schools and also in the county. Next slide, please. And just to kind of, reemphasize, right, this beautiful chart, right, since the 1980s, the Latinx population in Montgomery County has grown 415%. Next slide. Another part that we wanted to uplift, right, is just the economic contribution that Latinx community has here, not only in this area, but across the country. And just to uplift, right, if U.S. Latinx or U.S. Latinos were a country, they would be the 5th largest economy globally, only ranking behind the U.S., China, and Germany and Japan. So we just wanted to also uplift just the economic contributions that our community has as well. Next slide, please. With that being said, like so many of us in our cohorts, right, in politics, work, school, and the community, the Latinx community is targeted, especially when it comes to economic conditions, when they are precarious. And our community is often the scapegoat and the cause of economic and political issues facing the country. We are approaching an election year, and I'm sure that you have seen in the news just how our community is used as a scapegoat when it comes to these particular incidents. But like so many of our communities, right, a lot of our Latinx community people who have darker skin color oftentimes experience these incidences of bias and hate crimes at a higher percentage than those who are lighter. And so we just wanted to uplift just, some of these historical events, but also just what's happening not just nationally, but also here in the state of Maryland. Next slide, please. Like so many of you, we did a bunch of surveys with not only just our community, but our youth. And one of the things that we had trouble identifying and just kind of gathering is that so many of our community members did not know the definition of an anti-hate bias crime or incident, and so many don't know where to report. And so these are just some of the captions that came from those surveys. Next slide, please. And again, we did a huge survey with the youth, and again, like so many of the adults that reported, right, about 65% of them did not know what a hate crime is, right? 10% think that they may have been victims or recipients of a hate crime or bias incident, and 25% want to learn and be more of an ongoing effort to combat hate. So I wanted to dive just into the policy recommendations. We have put forth 7 policy recommendations based on the feedback that we have received from our community and all the conversations that we've been having in the past few months. So first slide. First policy recommendation we have put forth is to task the Office of Community Engagement to conduct regional Spanish listening sessions in the predominantly Latinx census tract of the county with adults and youth ages 11 to 18 to collect their experiences with agencies regarding hate, bias, and prejudice in the county, and to pinpoint areas of concern and develop an action plan to address these concerns as well. The reason why we've put this together is that there's very little quantitative and qualitative data on hate/bias incidents and crimes in Montgomery County, and we felt that we must conduct a needs assessment to learn more about the Latinx experience here in Montgomery County. And from these regional listening sessions, we hope to develop a baseline to determine where the Latinx community is experiencing and prioritizing areas of need and develop action plans to address those concerns. For policy recommendation number 2, launch a campaign and training for the community on how to report hate crimes towards Latinx and where to obtain help and what to do when concerns are not addressed in a timely manner. Again, the Latinx community has been the target of a lot of hate/bias incidents for so long, and this is predominantly underreported, just like so many other cohorts, especially in our undocumented community. And so, in addition, many Latinx community members fear the consequences of reporting, right? Potentially due to their immigration status. And this is why a countywide training and awareness have to occur in order to address the implicit and explicit hate/bias that Latinx community members experience. Next slide, please. Policy recommendation number 3, provide cultural competency training to all county agencies on the Latinx community, how to conduct outreach with our community, and how to provide effective and excellent customer service to Latinx. As we shared, the Latinx community is not monolith, but it is a complex and layered and has its unique challenges, just like so many of our different communities, to access equity and opportunities within the county. And the county-based solutions must be made with the Latinx community, not for them. And so we can't have that one-size-fits-all mentality. And so this is why we came up with policy recommendation number 3. Next slide, please. Tasks the appropriate county office to form a diversity hiring work group to increase the number of Latinx represented in managerial and executive roles within the county government agencies, because representation matters. If our children are to be the future of Latinx leaders, we must provide them with role models that they can identify with and aspire to be, and living up to the ideals of Montgomery County as one of the most diverse counties in the country requires that our boardrooms, executive offices, and county council reflects the diversity of our county. Representation matters. Next slide, please. Increase funding and capacity for interpretation and translation in key county agencies such as the courts, MC 311, information line, DHHS, police, fire, and etc. So we just wanted to uplift something very interesting. We got some information that MC 311 is obviously underutilized, especially in our community, right? So since the fiscal year of 2020, roughly 6% of all calls to MC 311 were conducted in Spanish, only up 3% for the pandemic, right? And so that's something that we really took a look at and said that's pretty low, right? And nearly 40% of all Montgomery County Latinx are in need of some sort of interpretation and translation services. And so closing the opportunity and access gap for Latinx means providing robust language access in key county agencies, still ensuring that the service is being advertised appropriately is important. Next slide, please. Created a Montgomery County Office of Immigrant Affairs to help coordinate information, resources, training, and services for new and long-term immigrant residents of the county. Just like DC and New York City, other jurisdictions have created offices of immigrant affairs to streamline services and avoid duplication. And Montgomery County could learn from these best practices to create an infrastructure that can help our immigrant and refugee communities better access services and resources and integrate into the diverse fabric of Montgomery County. And next slide, please, last one. And our final policy recommendation, create a community grant initiative or continue a community grant initiative to distribute funding to grassroots organizations to engage in authentic community outreach and education to prevent hate/bias incidents and crimes towards the Latinx community. Obviously we are living in a precarious time in history when hatred is at an all-time high. And many of our colleagues who presented before us have stated as much. And we believe in the power of our Montgomery County community and faith-based organizations to help educate, heal, and create safe spaces for civil discourse, cross-cultural learning, and understanding. However, most organizations obviously require funding to do this well. and reach as many of our residents as we can. And so our last and final recommendation is asking the county government to facilitate and continuing this investment in our peace and healing by continuing to provide resources to organizations who do this work. This is our last slide, but we just want to also say thank you to all the cohorts who have worked tirelessly to put forth their presentations, but also their recommendations. And obviously, thank you to the county council, county executive, and police chief for being supportive in this entire process. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Philip Alexander Downey, and I am one of the co-chairs for the LGBTQ plus cohort. Just a little bit of history on the LGBTQ community. We are as diverse as the makeup of the entire world. We belong to every single community that is present here tonight. And so when we talk about queer identities, trans identities, non-binary identities, and the need to just belong, they also need to belong within each and every one of the communities that are also present here tonight. And so often the hate biases, and the hate and the anti-LGBTQ plus biases that are faced are internal and hit so close to home. In our findings that you will see, that you can take a look at in our full report, in the CDC findings, that you will find the reportings on youth to be staggering and just outright sad. The rates of suicide are exponentially higher in our LGBTQ youth. The rates of homelessness are exponentially higher. The rates of food insecurity. And so when we talk about a word that I love, and intersectionality, we just know that there is a need. And just for all of you, intersectionality is the way that our diversity compiles. And because of that intersectionality, there can often and will often be multiple levels of oppression. And so it doesn't just stem from what could be as racism or cultural oppression. It could be religious oppression. And we know that from our findings and the reports that came out within the Montgomery County 2023 LGBTQ Community Survey report, that more than 40% of LGBTQ folks identify as religious, and faith and spirituality is extremely important to them. So within all of the communities that are here, because I know that we have a lot of faith leaders and all of our communities, just make a home for every one of us, all of your children, your brothers, your sisters, your non-binary siblings, because they belong, we belong, and you all belong. So thank you all so much. And so we can go to the next slide. So the LGBTQ plus cohort is made up of myself. I am also the executive director of Living Your Truth and the chair of the Montgomery County Pride Family, which consists of the MoCo Pride Center, Trans Maryland, Maryland Trans Unity, the Coalition for Inclusive Schools and Community, with a host of others, Reverend Ali Casey Bell, and Rabbi Adam Rosenwasser. Next slide, please. And you can go to the next slide. So, like I was saying, our community is at a pivotal moment, and it requires decisive action to combat hate crimes and biases. While promoting wellness, the policy recommendations presented here form a high-level roadmap towards creating a safer and more inclusive Montgomery County for all of its residents, irrespective of their gender identity, sexual orientation, or amazing and diverse cultural backgrounds. Next slide, please. So our policy recommendations, first I want to talk about our county government policy recommendations. Montgomery County is the most populous county in all of Maryland, and we do not have a physical LGBTQIA resource center. And Montgomery County has had a long, amazing history of protections for LGBTQ folks, and we know now that we have amazing county leadership who is ready to ensure that this changes. So we want to make sure that we have a physical space that is accessible to our most vulnerable and underserved populations in our county, the ones who need the services the most. Because when we talk about helping those, we know that if people who are doing the worst and who are the most marginalized, if they have their basic needs met, healthcare, housing, food, jobs, then we know that they will be doing a lot better. And so ensuring that we can combat hate at every single level is a way that we can make sure that all of our communities and our citizens, especially the most vulnerable populations, feel that they belong. So a physical resource center gives access to those spaces and access to those resources and ensures that we bridge the gap between service and that we provide culturally competent services so that people aren't re-victimized when they enter into spaces to seek out resources that should be basic to all human needs. Our next recommendation is expanding satellite programming. We want to allocate funds to community-led organizations to ensure that we are able to continue to reach our most vulnerable populations. One of the organizations that I lead provides testing resources at every single program, of course, that are free to individuals in the public. And we find that they are able to access these resources in a place that doesn't involve them being re-traumatized or looked at as being odd because they may present in a different way or their pronouns are not being respected, or they are treated with racism because they are a community member who is not white, or they are treated with Islamophobia because they may be wearing a hijab, or they're treated with anti-Jewish bias and anti-Semitism because they're wearing a kippah. And so there are so many spaces where we are just trying to ensure that every single community member is taken care of. So those satellite programmings to reach our vast, diverse population of Montgomery County, as we know it is a very vast county, is absolutely vital. So ensuring that these resources, of course, are accessible and that they're culturally competent is extremely important, as I said, for the myriad of reasons, but just to ensure that we are not re-traumatizing people, and they do not have to live in or exist in spaces or get services from spaces that are vital to their wellness when they aren't treated right and in spaces where they, like I said, are being re-victimized. Next slide. So as a lot of you said, that county-wide community-based cultural competency training is extremely important. And so implementing that within our government agencies and ensuring that within spaces that there are services, not just having a doctor that's culturally competent, but having an intake specialist that is also culturally competent and treats people with cultural humility, having the phlebotomist and every single level of care in between to ensure that the needs of, like I said, our most vulnerable community members are met. And then intersectionality as a focus. As I said, I can't stress this enough, because making sure that if someone walks into a space that they are not treated poorly because they are Latinx, and then also having to ensure that they're not treated poorly because they are queer, and also making sure they're not treated poorly because of religious diversities. We have to tackle it at every single facet of when we're delivering services. And so moving to our MCPS recommendations. And so we recommend expanded professional development days by 30% to provide culturally competent and community-derived professional development for school staff to ensure they have the tools to create inclusive environments in their classrooms. And so if teachers and educators and school staff cannot be themselves and do not feel safe being out and living proudly, then how can they create environments where students are able to live free and authentic lives? Next slide, please. So our Montgomery County Police recommendations are ERGs, or employee resource groups. Police also should feel very safe. They should feel safe presenting as themselves. Their religious diversities should be celebrated. Their gender and sexuality diversity should be celebrated and also understood. Because if our police officers and our law enforcement are able to create environments for themselves where they feel safe and open within their own work environments, and I'm talking about internally here, then they create pathways and bridge those gaps where there are lots of individuals who may not feel safe reporting crimes and anti-hate biases that happen to them. And hate biases that happen to them. And so we talk about comprehensive tracking, and like Chief Jones pointed out at the beginning, Montgomery County Police Department does a fantastic job, and they are on the vanguard, frankly, than a lot of our state and even federal reporting systems through a lot of research that we have done. But we still noticed that a footnote inside of the annual report on bias incidents stated that anti-homosexual phrases and images are also frequently reported. And so we always ask, why is this not a part of that comprehensive reporting? Because we don't find it acceptable if those biases, images, or that hate rhetoric is being talked about in any other community, and we cannot find it acceptable just because there is an extreme frequency of those images and anti-homosexual phrases that are often seen. And so we need to ensure that every single incident is reported. Intersectionality. Yes. And of course, as I talked about within intersectionality, implementing comprehensive tracking and reporting of anti-LGBTQ biases, hate crimes, and anti-BIPOC violence and biases, and reporting on what role intersectionality plays in that. Because as we know, and as we've seen so many times before, that people are often the victim of multiple forms of hate. I can tell you from being in a Jewish fraternity that I have been called every single terrible slur that you can think of for Black people and for Jewish folks. And so growing up as a first generation American with Jamaican parentage, I've heard every single slur that you can hear for LGBTQ folks inside of Black communities. And I can tell you that it will always hit extremely close to home for any type of hate that I see, because I know that it is frequently those who just don't understand, they're not educated, and the hate is being taught in spaces. And that is why we need to ensure that we are teaching the opposite and that we are in spaces like the Montgomery County Police Department, Montgomery County Public Schools, and our government entities that ensure that all of their staff, all of their teams, their communities feel extremely safe being their most authentic selves. So, next slide. So in conclusion, our LGBTQ residents are resilient and diverse and are a vital thread in the rich tapestry of Montgomery County. We envision a future where inclusivity is not just a goal, but a reality. We invite you to envision with us a future where every individual, regardless of their gender identity, sexual orientation, race, culture, religion, ethnicity, or intersecting identities can thrive without fear of discrimination. Our recommendations for policy changes, cultural competency, and inclusive education serve as a snapshot for this transformative journey. Montgomery County has, with its proactive protections, has the power to set a precedent for inclusivity. So let us all forge ahead, championing the cause of a safer and more welcoming county for LGBTQ individuals and all Montgomery County residents. Together, let us build a future where every individual is not just accepted, but celebrated, ensuring Montgomery County shines as a beacon of inclusion, empowerment, and progress. Thank you for your attention, your commitment, your dedication to fostering a Montgomery County where everyone can live authentically without fear and with the fullness of their identities embraced. Thank you all so much. And just thank you to Council President Evan Glass for putting this anti-hate task force together. I can tell you that Evan has been on the forefront and then also on the receiving end of a lot of hate comments and over the years since he has been in office. Thank you, Marcus Jones, for the work that you have done and you continue to do within our police department. Not only the listening sessions, but literally showing up in person. I called his office and he has come to my events before where we talked about turning anger into action. And thank you, County Executive Elric, for your complete and total understanding of these issues so that we can continue to fight this and for your commitment to change. Thank you all.
Good evening. To be last. I can only say how much I've appreciated listening to all of your presentations. It's been an incredible honor to be a part of this task force. Thank you, President Glass, for assembling and inviting us to have what I would like to call courageous conversations, difficult conversations. I'm Umbreen Khan, and I serve as a member of the Muslim cohort alongside Ilhan Qadri, Adila Sharif, Firdos Kadir, who is unable to be here because he's unwell, and Imam Faisal Khan, who is unable to be with us tonight because he's traveling. Our work would not have been possible without the support and input from our incredibly diverse community. It is diverse, probably the most religiously diverse religious community, according not just to us, but to researchers who look at the cultural, ethnic, age, country of origin. And even within our religious community, we, like many of you, are not a monolith. Our report included 17 very specific recommendations, from cultural competency training that we'd like to see in the schools to mandatory reporting processes that we feel would enable better policy making, better insight, combating the model minority myth that exists that impacts our communities, as well as other perceptions. But you'll notice you only see one slide here tonight. We're not reviewing those because we have an emergency. And I'm going to try really hard to keep it together. When I joined this task force, I had no idea how many calls I would get from members of the community who, I'll be honest, at one point weren't so happy with me because I stood up here in this county holding positions that some disagreed with because of their own personal religious beliefs, which I respect. I have heard countless stories from members of our community who are afraid. They are scared. These are not individuals who think lightly about calling 311 or the non-emergency line. How many of you attended or watched our presentation, which we delivered on October 10th? Thank you. One of the issues that we pointed out that is an uncomfortable truth for many people in this room is that Montgomery County engaged in a surveillance program enlisting the school system that explicitly targeted young Muslim boys using a set of criteria that have since been debunked, dismissed, and determined to be not only racialized, but reflecting a legal, constitutionally questionable approach that absolutely fundamentally undermines the fundamental premise of community-oriented policing, of building trust with the community, engaging SROs and others to identify potential behavioral problems to report for countering violent extremism. This did not happen 50 years ago. This happened when my son was in high school in Montgomery County. So when I tell you my phone, Ilhan's phone, Adila's phone, Firdos's phone, Fazl's phone, our Signal, our WhatsApp have been blowing up with calls and concerns and frightened parents and students, I'm not exaggerating. With all due respect to everyone here, if you don't think that people are losing their jobs, being called into HR and told to put their kafaya that they're wearing, to put their scarf away, that its mere presence, this scarf, its mere presence constitutes something that is hate. That the flag, the Palestinian flag, constitutes hate. Now, we are a diverse cohort. Our name, and I'm going to put this on, because I want to tell you, I'm fighting back tears. I'm putting it on for those 3 boys. I'm putting it on for the families out there who are afraid that their kids speak Arabic and they walk down the street leaving their grandmother's house and they're shot. I'm putting this on for the kids at school who yesterday were told that putting a kafaya on means that they support Hamas in Montgomery County. We have an emergency. And I want to be clear. Anti-Semitism is a significant problem. It is a plague on our cultures and our societies. I am unequivocally, and have demonstrated, as many of us have in our community, not just me, to speak out and to challenge the conspiracy theories, the hatred of Jewish people. It is real, Meredith. It is real. and we must combat it. But where we are today, the emergency we have, is that the definition of anti-Semitism is become weaponized. It is being used to silence. It is being used to scare. It is being used to intimidate political speech. Our cohort is called the Muslim cohort, but in reality, we embody all in our county who are perceived inaccurately to be members of this group. Middle Eastern, Arab, Palestinian, Palestinian Christian, atheists, Palestinian Jews, Palestinian Baha'i. I have encountered more stories in the last 3 weeks than I care to carry. And the reality is our community is afraid. Islamophobia and anti-Muslim bigotry are at an unprecedented level today. We have ignorance and misinformation fueling microaggressions, fueling hate incidents, and fueling hate crimes. Most, if not all, are underreported, if at all. In Maryland alone, CARE received 114 complaints since we, the Muslim cohort, presented our report to you between October 9th and November 9th. The national office reports a 216% surge compared to this time last year. And that's only the folks who had the courage to pick up the phone. But those numbers don't reflect reality, and we know that because our system's not working. If we think of pressure testing a system, we think of pressure testing during crisis. The last 7 weeks have painfully illustrated how members of the Palestinian, Arab, Middle Eastern, Muslim, South Asian, Sikh communities are not able to access the same systems to set up and combat hate in Montgomery County. And here's the reality. They're being sent a message that their experiences are neither important nor valid.
The time is now 8:50, and we'll be closing in 10 minutes. The exercise from the walking track, game room, and the pickleball activity is now over. The garage gates will be closed. You may exit garage but not re-enter. Please make sure when you're exiting the building to use the side doors. Have a wonderful night.
Reporting hate crimes in Montgomery County is not easy. Communications are not consistent, where to report, when, to whom. It remains opaque at best, even for advocates like us. This is especially true when it's not violent. Reporting a non-violent incident is incredibly challenging if it doesn't involve physical intimidation and physical evidence of harm. Complicating this is the culture. In the last 6 weeks, there are well-founded fears and reports of reprisals and retribution for filing complaints with HR, with community organizations. Filing complaints have led to difficult conversations in organizations and around kitchen tables. A growing number of students and adults are afraid that they're being surveilled online, targeted because of their religious, ethnic, cultural identity, and political speech, that they will be doxxed, intimidated, ostracized if they speak out or seek protection. There is a prevalent belief that in Montgomery County, if you file a report of an experience in the Montgomery County Public Schools to law enforcement, or to the community relations mechanisms, that it will not be handled, it will not be treated with the same urgency, or any urgency at all. Our recommendation: we need to overhaul our hate crimes reporting system. We have the best of intentions, let's act. And the first step I believe we need is an ombudsman for hate incidents. An ombudsman, someone who sits outside of your agencies, who is responsible for ensuring that the hate crimes and bias incidents are reported and documented in a manner that is consistent and equitable. A position that can identify where the internal interagency breakdowns happen, things that we as advocates can't see. to offer recommendations and provide a public accounting, a position that can be visible and aware of the need for being a point of contact for residents seeking assistance in organizations. We are relying on third parties. We don't need to do that. We are too big, too diverse, and we value and believe that hate has no place here. Let's fix the system. And most importantly, we need to make sure that when the incidents are counted, we need an ombudsman to track, are they being investigated and prosecuted? Let me share a few experiences. There is a perception and a documented report post 9/11 by a group called ISPU, I referenced it during the presentation, documenting that when perpetrators of crimes are perceived to be Muslim, the outcomes are far more intense. When perpetrators of crime are not, the outcomes are much easier. There's leniency, there are mitigating factors. Are you treated differently in Montgomery County if you report a crime based on your race, your religious identity, your ethnicity, or gender identity? That's a perception that exists when you interact, when you pick up the phone and you call and talk to an investigating officer. It can be countered with transparency and accuracy in reporting. It's an experience we even had on our task force. Our very own member tried to report to MCPD a hate incident. She was redirected, MCPD came, she was redirected and told, we can't take the report, you need to go to Rockville, happened in Rockville. She contacted Rockville. There was confusion, lack of clarity. This is a hate task force, anti-hate task force member. She was exasperated, and had it not been for the support of a staff member in the county executive's office, who's here tonight, had it not been for your assistance, that report wouldn't have been filed. We're lucky. We know you. It's not the case for most residents in this county. That's not how it should work. In that process, we learned that MCPD data does not reflect incidents that may take place in Rockville, Gaithersburg, Chevy Chase, Tacoma Park, and other potential enforcement agencies that receive reports. We need to do better. We need to unify that data. We need to make sure it's centrally reported, and we need an ombudsman that can be accountable to the council and the people. What we have also observed is that it is incredibly difficult to get these incidents investigated, even when evidence is captured on video. This is not a new story for a marginalized community. It's just not. It took 1 million views of a video to get action after an incident in Potomac, Maryland, where a woman in a car with her child was verbally intimidated, blocked from moving in her car. She was threatened by a pedestrian who banged on her car with her cell phone while hurling racial epithets. Many people saw it. The woman struggled to have her report taken. She tried 2 times to get a report and investigation. It wasn't until she reached out again to staff to get assistance. And then she took the extra step by identifying the perpetrator, taking that information to the investigator. And then we learned recently that in fact, that individual was sent a district court summons. I was startled. A high-profile incident in Montgomery County. Hate has no home here. There will be no impunity for hate action. MCPD identified the woman with support from the victim. One would expect that leadership would celebrate and issue a message to the community there will be consequences. Not doxing, but updating the community. We didn't receive that information. I was redirected to an online research database. I was told that there were mitigating factors, that you never know, some people can be going through a hard time. I was told on a call, several of you were on it, you never know. We were told by the investigating officer, people have bad days sometimes. 1 million views. You think someone's going to pick up the phone who doesn't have evidence and call? I want you to contrast the absence of communication to instead the swift and sharp rebuke of the largest immigrant rights service organization that had the temerity to express solidarity with Palestinians. They were threatened with the loss of a government grant and funding, maligned as anti-Semitic, publicly rebuked and sanctioned by many elected leaders in our county for First Amendment activities that are protected. It may be uncomfortable, but they're protected. It's protected speech. What message are you telling to the Muslim Community Center that gets a grant? Nothing political from you. What are you signaling to the LGBTQ community that wants to raise up an issue? You can be political, but don't be too political. You can raise issues of hate, but not ones that make us uncomfortable. What are we signaling here? We're weaponizing hate as a way of silencing criticism of the actions of the state of Israel. It is not just happening in Montgomery County. It's happening across the country. And it's not just being used against members of this cohort and community. It's being used also against members of the Jewish community who speak out, who lead and work in coalition with others in multi-faith gatherings to call for a ceasefire. Second recommendation, urgent. We need a county-wide summit. Not a town hall, a summit. Leaders in our county, and by leaders, I mean elected leaders. I mean business owners. I mean owners of federal contracting agencies. I mean public school teachers and principals. We need the civic leaders of our county, the leaders of the NGOs who witnessed what happened to CASA. We need a summit to state unequivocally an affirmation for our First Amendment right as a fundamental cornerstone of our democracy. It is also essential to be able to condemn without asterisk or without an and or a but, to condemn Islamophobia and anti-Muslim bigotry. Since joining this task force, I have been invited more places than I can go to talk about anti-Muslim bigotry and Islamophobia, and like many of you, this is not my full-time job. And I cannot tell you how many times people have wrestled with concern that how can we talk about Islamophobia without talking about anti-Semitism? And I pause and I wonder, why is that? Could it be that the deep Islamophobic trope that we talked about on October 10th, that a trope, that belief that somehow Muslims and Jews are fundamentally morally different? We're not. It's a deep, deep, deep stereotype. This notion that Muslims and Jews cannot coexist, cannot be neighbors, cannot be in the same family. History and reality and our lived experience deny that. I know my family certainly does. I want to be really clear, before October 7th, when we did our presentation, Islamophobia and anti-Muslim bigotry were serious in our county. Now it's an emergency. They've skyrocketed in part because of the messaging of leaders who've suggested explicitly that somehow there's equivalency between 2 million Palestinians living in occupation. They don't have a standing army. They live in occupation. They are an occupied people. Are collectively responsible for the acts of Hamas, a terror act. How is it that we are holding 2.2 million complicit for the act of terror? And that somehow leaves them not entitled to basic human rights, such as access to food, electricity, clean water, and fuel. So what do our kids want to do in this democracy? They are suffering and want to raise their voices to support the oppression that they see. And what they are encountering is, if you wear the scarf, if you hold the flag, that means that you are supporting and condoning terror. I had 3 conversations last night. There is,
Community Recreation Center. The time is now 9.
and it's time for me to wrap
We
up.
are now officially closed. Please return all items to the front desk at this time if you haven't done so. The garage gates will be closed and you may exit the facility, but you may not re-enter. Please make sure you use the side doors by exiting the facility. Have a great night. See you back tomorrow.
We are leaders in our county, all of us. Our work and words signal to those in positions of authority who deserve sympathy and empathy and who does not. Who's entitled to speak on political issues and who's not. These messages flow from leaders into the culture, and it manifests in ways that we don't see because they're not reported. There are the stories that we don't see, and then there are the stories that horrify us. The ones that make moms like me call my kid and ask him to take off the scarf, to not wear it in public. Because it's become so demonized to a degree that it has become a target on his back. A scarf that celebrates a resilient culture, not just Palestinians, but is seen across many cultures. Celebrates fish and the olives and the resilience of a community. Look, this is not new, but this time is different. I don't want to use hate to fight hate. Couldn't agree with you more. But we need to discuss and we need to have an honest conversation about how anti-Semitism, the definition, which was passed by the council, it was controversial. The examples were controversial. Promises were made that it wouldn't be used in circumstances like the ones we're in. But here we are. And so I humbly ask you, Mark. I ask you as a resident, I ask you on behalf of a community that is afraid to call you. We need a leadership summit in which we can unequivocally say anti-Muslim bigotry in all its forms has no home here. We need more than words, we need those actions. We need to demonstrate and we need to correct the false understanding and misperceptions people have. President Glass, I appreciate your leadership and courage to bring us all together. I'm simply asking for us to come together to wrestle with something that's really difficult. I don't want the kids to think that hate has no home here is a platitude. I want them to feel like it is something that we are going to work to implement and to address in a real and substantive way. Thank you.
Thank you to everybody for bringing your ideas, bringing your concerns, and bringing your true selves to this conversation. I don't think there was any individual who spoke tonight who was at ease with the current situation that we are all living in. The reason that we are all here and have been working together is because the status quo is unacceptable. The status quo is hurtful, it's harmful, It's detrimental, and we have to do better. There is no option. And as I was listening to every single person, I was taking notes and took more than 36 recommendations among the 6 different groups. And I think there's even more than that because you were all very mindful of the time. And what I heard was a need for more connection and communication, which includes community listening sessions and convenings, translations, physical gathering spaces, a call for the strengthening of public safety, both in a response to incidents, but also better education for those who are deployed to incidents. There's definitely a need for more public education on how and where to report incidents, which was raised multiple times. More security funding and community grant competency, and a theme throughout making sure that our kids are safe at school. And I again appreciate MCPS and even Montgomery College for being part of these courageous conversations. Because we have all been raw and have brought our true selves, because ultimately that's what we want to do every single day in our community, be our true selves. And this conversation tonight was certainly difficult, and we know that they have to be difficult moving forward if we're going to reach a place where we can all be safe and all be accepted and all feel comfortable. And next week, this will be brought to the full council, where all of my colleagues will be able to weigh in and share their thoughts. And then it is up to all of us, both the elected officials, community leaders, faith leaders, and others in our beautifully diverse community to take the next step. We know that this is not the end of the conversation. I'm not quite sure where on that path we are, but we got a long way to go, as we heard tonight. But we're laying it all bare, putting it all out there, being our true selves, because we have to. And I appreciate every single one of you, your neighbors, your congregants, your coworkers, for being part of this conversation. And so we're going to continue this conversation next Tuesday. And then while this group might not be convening, I know that you all have made connections within your cohorts, amongst yourselves, and we want to continue this. Not only the county executive and myself, but I know those that you represent and speak to. And so as long as we all pledge to continue this conversation, to go to the hard places where they have to be had, that's the only place and the only way that we're going to make Montgomery County safe and make sure that this motto is not just a motto. Because we know in our hearts that hate has no home here. We need to convince other people of that, and we need to take all these action items, turn them into reality, and prove not only to ourselves, but everybody else who's watching, that Montgomery County can and will be that model. So thank you all for your participation. I'll see you all, or those of you who are willing, on Tuesday. Thank you all, and have yourselves a good night.